Throughout World War II, the French resistance tried their best to take out collaborators and those who they thought were siding with their enemy, the Germans. In total, dozens of high-profile assassinations were carried out on well-known members of the French government and the armed forces. Some were shot in the open during the day in full view of many people who just passed by. The resistance could be lethal, and they brought down one of the highest-ranking admirals of the whole of the Second World War, a man who held the office of Deputy Prime Minister of France. Francois Darlan was the de facto head of the Vichy government, and he led the puppet state to a huge amount of collaboration with the German occupiers. Under his oversight, many people were rounded up, and those suspected of resisting the occupation were tortured and were then executed themselves. But the French resistance on the 24th of December 1942 struck and brought the life of the traitorous French admiral to an end. Today we look at his execution. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Francois Darlan was born on the 7th of August 1881, and his family were intertwined with the French Navy for generations. After graduating from the Naval Academy, Darlan, during World War I, commanded an artillery battery that was involved in the battle at Verdun. He fought throughout the conflict, and then after, he was in command of a number of training vessels, and he rose throughout the ranks of the Navy. In 1932, he was promoted to the rank of Vice Admiral, and he then in 1936 tried to convince the British that they needed to cooperate with the French to deal with the growing threat of Germany and Italy. At this point, Adolf Hitler had taken power, and intelligence services knew that he was building up his armed forces to a huge extent. Darlan was concerned about this German threat, and from 1937 he was appointed the Chief of the Naval Staff and became an admiral. As the head of the French Navy, he used political connections to expand the Navy in the face of the Kriegsmarine's expansion. He was a French nationalist who wanted to preserve the power of France, and he saw the Navy as one of the world's greatest, but it was in need of rapid expansion. But he actually saw the bigger threat as the Italian Navy rather than the Kriegsmarine. He would in 1938 mobilise the Navy to be on the highest state of alert due to the Sudetenland crisis, and he expected the Italians to join any conflict on the side of the Axis and Hitler. Of course, Darlan would be right. He thought that France would be secure behind the Maginot Line, and he had many meetings in the lead-up to the outbreak of the Second World War. But after France's declaration of war in September 1939, Darlan became the Commander-in-Chief of the French Navy. However, when France was invaded, it crumbled quickly at the hands of the Axis and the German army. Darlan was proud of the navy he had helped to build, and he promised the British that no French ship would fall into German hands. But he was talking of an armistice with the Germans, and he was willing to accept it if the French fleet would not be taken by the Germans. Darlan thought also that the British were finished, and that they would be defeated quickly too, and with this he began to consider defecting. Winston Churchill believed that Darlan could have been the leader of the Free French Forces, or the French Resistance, and he thought he would have been a more powerful leader than Charles de Gaulle. But the British would sink the French fleet at Mers el-Kebir to put it out of action and to prevent it falling into German hands. Darlan expected the Axis to then win the war, and he thought it was in his best interests to then collaborate with the Nazis, and he then began to slightly distrust the British. He joined the Vichy government, the collaborationist state led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, and was made the Vice President of the Council and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of the Interior, and Minister of National Defence, making him practically the head of the Vichy collaborationist government, and he was later named the successor to Marshal Pétain. Darlan then met with high-ranking Nazis too, such as Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, and he actually saw the final solution as a way that he could make a deal with the Germans. He thought that he could do a deal with the Nazis for the Jews inside of France, which would then relieve the occupation slightly and make it less tough for those French people who were living under occupation. He was rather silent about the extermination of the Jews, and he repeatedly offered also to militarily cooperate with Hitler against the British. Hitler did not trust Darlan and the French, and he wanted it to remain in support and in collaboration. But the Germans were suspicious of Francois Darlan also. He only answered to Pétain and had broad powers to give out his own orders. In November 1942, he went to Algiers to see his son who had been injured, and the day after the Western Allies invaded French North Africa. Darlan was captured, but he did do a deal with Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Allied commander, and this was for political and military cooperation. This was very controversial, as Darlan had been a Nazi collaborator, and this upset many in the Free French movement. He refused, though, to repeal many of the persecuting laws of the Vichy Regime, and many political prisoners were sent to concentration camps also. However, what was not known is that the resistance were beginning to hatch a plot to assassinate, execute and take out Francois Darlan, and he was considered in their eyes a terrible traitor. Ferdinand Bonnier de la Chapelle and three of his comrades, Otto Gross and Robert and Philippe Tournier Ragueneau, came up with a plan to take out Darlan. The four of them drew straws, and Bonnier, or de Chapelle, got the shortest, meaning it was his job to try and take out the powerful Admiral. Bonnier was given a 7.65mm pistol, and the assassination date was set at the 24th of December 1942. Bonnier entered the People's Palace in Algiers, and after eating, he rested and then waited in a hallway. After some time, Francois Darlan appeared accompanied by another naval officer. Bonnier pulled out his pistol, and he shot Darlan at point-blank range. He fired 2 shots. One struck Darlan in the face, causing terrible damage, and he then fired the second shot, which struck the Admiral in the chest, and he then fell to the floor. He also fired 1 shot at the other naval officer, and with the loud sound of gunshots being heard, Bonnier de la Chapelle was wrestled to the ground. Darlan never regained consciousness, and he had been killed by the fatal shots at point-blank range. Less than 48 hours after, Bonnier himself was dead and was inside of a grave after being condemned to death by a court-martial and then being shot at dawn, being executed. This was ruthless justice in the eyes of the Vichy regime. But amongst the Allies, Darlan's assassination and death did not bring too much sympathy. He wasn't very well liked and was seen by many as a pompous collaborator, and he was seen as someone who was a turncoat and a traitor who could be brought through financial negotiations. Some, like Winston Churchill, did praise Darlan for his work in North Africa, but he was one of many men who found themselves being taken out and executed by the French resistance and by those who were very much against the Vichy regime. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.